Welcome to Rash Retro Comics. In this episode, I answer your questions. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a big deal, and I'm very thankful for all of you who watch, who subscribe, and who comment. Comic book collecting is a great hobby. The reason why I do this is because I really do love the hobby, and I just want to share some of my insights as well as, the comic books that I've collected over the years. I'm grateful that you watch, and I hope to keep on doing this for as long as I can. Okay, so let's look at some of the questions people have asked. Christian Aluya, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asks, do I prefer DC, Marvel, or Charlton Bronze Age horror? Which publisher has better horror titles in my opinion? So I have a preference towards DC and Marvel. I do have some Charlton horror, not many though. And one of the reasons why is that Charlton horror is just hard to find. And in terms of quality, it would be third on the list. In terms of reading, I would put DC horror titles first, just because they actually did a lot of new material and there's a good amount of stuff to kind of look through. I would say the three big titles are House of Mystery, House of Secrets, and Witching Hour in terms of quality reading. For DC horror, I do like the 100-page issues, and I do have a fair number of them in my collection. So I thought I should show you a few examples. This is House of Mystery number 224, and this is House of Mystery number 227. A lot of these have a good number of new stories as well as good reprints from the past. In this particular issue, there is a reprint of a story drawn by Joe Manili. And Joe Manili is an exceptional artist who did work from the 50s. And a lot of people say he could have been the next Jack Kirby because he was very prolific. He did a lot of work and his work was very good. I can kind of show you an example of one of the pages he did in this story. These can range a lot in terms of prices. Sometimes you can find lower grade copies for next to nothing, but if you do want true high grade copies, these can potentially be pretty expensive. But sometimes you can luck out. I bought these a number of years ago. For a time, I was kind of aggressively looking for 100-page issues, but I've since kind of slowed down because they are getting hard to get and they are getting more expensive. But House of Mystery number 227. One last example. This is a copy of House of Mystery number 228. Again, these 100-page issues, great for stories, for reprints, and fun to collect. Perhaps one of the lesser-known titles is The Unexpected. This title used to be Tales of the Unexpected, and it switched in the late 60s. And although the stories may not be as good as the ones in House of Mystery, House of Secrets, and Witching Hour, there's still some pretty good ones. This is issue 159 of The Unexpected. And this is a copy of Unexpected number 161. And I want to show you one last one. And this is a copy of Unexpected 162. I think what you'll see with DC a lot in the 70s is there are skeletons and skulls everywhere. It's a very common motif with DC horror books in the 1970s. The Marvel horror reprints I have a particular fondness of just because I don't know what it is about those titles that I just like collecting. Maybe because they're harder to find, and I have, I love those, in particular, those Marvel monster reprints. And let's take a look at some of them now, and I could talk a bit more about them. Probably my favorite run is Where Monsters Dwell. And this is a nice copy of issue number 1. This is a copy of number 2. And a lot of these covers were very similar, or almost the same as the originals, from Tales of Suspense, Tales to Astonish, and Strange Tales. This is a copy of number 3, The Monster Called Grotu. This is a copy of number 4. And as far as I could tell, this is actually not a reimagined cover from one of the previous monster titles. I could be wrong, though. If somebody knows where this originally came from, please let me know in the comments. But I think this is actually an original cover. This is a copy of number 5, Where Monsters Dwell number 5. Taboo is back. And I'm going to end off with a copy of Where Monsters Dwell number 6. This is actually a well-known issue because this reprints the first appearance of Groot from Tales to Astonish. So this book actually has some value. The thing about the DC horror 70s titles is now, if you want to get decent copies of like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Witching Hour that have really good covers, you have to pay a premium. And I get it because, they have beautiful covers and, they're hard to find, so they can get kind of expensive, but they've always been kind of like that. I just find that kind of annoying as a collector, just because they're more expensive. The Marvel stuff certainly has become more expensive as well too, but I think you can still find them kind of relatively cheaply. If you are adventurous, I can say that Charlton is certainly a fun publisher to collect, but very hard, very difficult in grade, absolutely. But some of this stuff is, you just can't find in any grade, I think. I do have a handful of Charlton horror titles. They had what I would say like these 3 ghost titles: Ghost Manor, Ghostly Haunts, and Ghostly Tales, I believe. And one thing that's kind of interesting is Ghostly Tales actually came out, I believe, in around 1966. So Charlton basically preempted kind of the horror surge that came out in the Bronze Age with these ghostly titles, because they were a little bit early with them. Now, Ghost Manor, the artwork is not great. The stories are also not very good. There is kind of this kind of mystique about Charlton horror books, just because you don't see them, but they're famously known to pay below what the market rates were for artists at that time. So, and it really reflects in their work. But this is a copy of Ghost Manor number 6. This is a copy of Ghostly Haunts number 27. Steve Ditko did a lot of work for Charlton. He did the superhero stuff with like Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, and The Question. He did a lot of early horror Charlton, and then he came back in the 70s and did a lot of work there. So certainly the Steve Ditko stuff is pretty cool. Like, his covers are pretty great. But again, if you want to give yourself a good challenge, Charlton books, especially in high grade, are very hard to find. And yeah, it could be a fun way to collect the horror books from the 1970s. So this is another example of a Steve Ditko cover, Ghostly Haunts number 25. And there's just something magical, I think, about Steve Ditko's work. His body of work is so large. He did a lot of outstanding covers in the 1970s for Charlton. I like all 3 to varying degrees. If I had a preference, if I had unlimited money, I would certainly chase DC horror more than Marvel. But I still really like Marvel. So Marty Monahan, 1991, asks, as a horror collector, what do I think of worn titles? I think worn titles are great. For the longest time, like early in my collecting years, worn titles, people were giving them away, like honestly. And you can still find worn titles, I think, for reasonably cheap. Well, I think reasonably cheap for the quality of stuff that you can get. When I think of like Creepy and Eerie, like the first 15, 16 issues of those are really good. And, the mid issues, not so great, but then they start to pick up again. They have a lot of quality art and stories. But worn titles are really interesting in that the publisher would warehouse all their kind of unsold copies. And so a lot of them still exist. And a lot of them still exist in pretty decent shape. And I remember being able to get them from Mile High Comics because Mile High purchased a very large warehouse collection of worn magazines, as well as other dealers. They were selling them for like literally nothing for a period of time. Like some of them 50 cents, $1. This would have been kind of in the 80s or 90s. And this was a time when I would be able to buy, like order from Mile High, and the shipping wasn't too bad, but I would buy a lot of this stuff. They've certainly gotten more pricey, but I think they're still very reasonable. Now, what I actually really like, if you can find them, are these. And these are the hardcover reprints by Dark Horse. And I look for these at used bookstores. And like I got this one for $25. $25 Canadian, which is ridiculously good. And what I also like about these is they have additional information about the different issues that they reprint. This is the hardcover, but they've also come out in softcover versions, which are, readily available. I'll also show a few examples of Warren magazines in my collection that I have left. I have a few Warren magazines that I still have in my collection. This is an issue of Creepy #1. For some reason, I got rid of my Eerie #2, which I honestly don't know why. I did have a lot of the Frazetta covers, the early Frazetta covers from Creepy and Eerie, but, sadly, they're all gone. But, you know what? That's okay. They're in the hands, I hope, of collectors who are enjoying them. But I still kept my Creepy #1. This is a copy of Vampirella #5 with a great Frazetta cover. Vampirella is probably the most collected or sought after Warren title with regards to comic books, because it had a lot of superb artwork, and the character is very popular. I still have a few of these. I don't have like a 1 or the very hard to find #3, but I do have some of the earlier issues, and they're great. One other Warren magazine I wanted to show is this Monster World #3. I do have a fair number of famous monsters, and I do have the complete run of Monster World. Now, these aren't necessarily comic books, but some of them do have black and white comics in them. Monster World was just a 10-issue series that came out in '64, and interestingly, they used it as an excuse to skip 10 issues of Famous Monsters, so Famous Monsters can accelerate their run to hit issue number 100. But this issue in particular is kind of interesting, because if you look in the later issues of Famous Monsters and other Warren magazines, they have ads in the back for back issues. And Monster World #3 was one that was missing. And apparently, I don't know if a lot of these got damaged in the warehouse or something, but this is one of the tougher issues to locate. Yeah, it's got a outstanding yellow cover, and it's, I believe, the she creature. And a lot of these Monster World issues had reprints of articles from Famous Monsters, but this is definitely a fun series. Brule's Rules 8584 asked, how has your collection changed over time, and what are your thoughts on the current state of the comic industry? I've been collecting since the 80s, and I've certainly amassed a lot of comic books over that time. At one time, I think my collection was probably close to 10,000 books, but it's now sitting at about 4,000 or so, maybe a little less. Now, the big changes in time have been more of a function of where my life stage is at. Once you get married, often you'll hear that a lot of collectors will get rid of their comic books. Or if you're doing a move, a life change in particular, that can put some pressure onto your comic books and what you're going to have to do with them. After I got married, because, these comic books take up a lot of space, I did slowly start to get rid of a lot of my collection. And I was fortunate during that time that I was able to actually sell them a lot through different means, mostly online through eBay. And this was probably like in the very late 90s, early 2000s. So early on, I was predominantly like a Marvel DC collector in the 80s. I collected what was popular at that time. I remember when Secret Wars came out, and this was when I was still kind of like in middle high school. That was a huge deal. And then Crisis came out, fairly shortly after, and that was a big event for DC. So those kind of two big events kind of shaped my collecting. There were a lot of popular characters at that time, like the X-Men, Wolverine. On DC side, I really liked Swamp Thing, the stuff that Alan Moore was putting out, and I was a big fan of Frank Miller. So those kind of Marvel and DC titles kind of shaped my collecting, but as well, I love to go to like the local comic book store and just go digging through the cheapy bins, and whatever kind of caught my eye, and whatever I thought was a really good deal, I would pick up. During the 80s, certainly later towards the 80s, a lot of stores would just kind of dump their overstock, and they would have like 50-cent bins, dollar bins, and I've been a frugal collector all my life, and I would certainly, scrounge, get on my hands and knees and look for whatever I thought was a good deal. Now, I'm more particular in terms of what I buy, and if you watch some of my haul videos, you'll see that I like buying older comic books, and as well as, esoteric weird stuff. I like when I encounter stuff that I haven't really seen before, or as well, if I think it's a really good deal or a reasonable deal, then certainly I will pick it up. The hardest thing I find these days, though, is restraint. And I'm sure, like other collectors can feel this in that, there's a lot of good stuff out there and a lot of stuff that I want. So I have to kind of push back on myself the temptation of picking up a lot of these books. What are my thoughts on the current comic industry? I don't buy so much new material. The stuff that I'll buy is mostly like trade paperbacks. This is what I'm currently reading, The Astonishing X-Men, and this is even like 20 years old, or something like The Boys. And this is more of a function of the TV show that came out than, well, I do like Garth Ennis though. But in terms of like what we call like the new floppies, I don't buy as much, and part of the reason why is I did take a long break from collecting, and coming back and looking at what's on the stands, it's not quite the same as what I remember or what I liked. That's not to say that I won't pick up a trade of something that has gotten a lot of buzz, but it's difficult for me to get back into new issues. I'm certainly curious about some things. I think I'm gonna probably pick up a bunch of Invincible trades just because the animated series is excellent, but it's harder for me to get new issues. And another reason why is like the cost. The cost of new floppies is just really expensive, and relatively to older stuff that I really like, it's so much more inexpensive to buy like the older, cheaper stuff. What do I think about the current comics industry? Well, it certainly feels like it's been in a slow decline for a while. But what I find interesting is that never have comic book characters been this popular in the general public. So you have this golden age of what I call comic book, like superhero media, in terms of film, in terms of TV, in terms of like animated series. There has never been a higher awareness of comic book characters. And this even extends to like going to these big comic book conventions. So comic book conventions have, I don't think, ever been this well attended, whether they're like Heroes Con, even our local Toronto Fan Expo and Comic Con. And, when I watch other channels' videos of people, going to these shows, they seem very popular. Popular to the point that actually I don't even like going to these shows anymore. Just because, man, they're so congested, and digging for comics at these really big shows just doesn't seem like it's fun anymore. So new issues certainly feel like they've been in a kind of a decline in terms of like what we call the floppies, but it's encouraging to see that younger people still read comic books, but they've kind of shifted towards more the manga style of books. And I understand that because, it's hard for newer readers just to go in and pick up new issues of something. Older collectors, we can kind of complain about, how often they kind of reset all these different titles back to one. And yeah, I like to grumble about that too, but I kind of get it because if you're a new reader, it's easier to start at issue 1 than it is to start at issue 973 or something like that. I'm still hopeful because, you know, the popularity of these characters is still very enduring, but it certainly seems like we are at a big crossroads in terms of like getting new readership for the kind of traditional comic books. Trade paperback sales, from what I understand, are still pretty good, but for comics, like for new comics, the single floppies, I don't know how much longer they're going to last. I try to be optimistic. I try to be hopeful, but it's kind of hard to see. But, you know, there's still like really good material out there. Like there's a lot of good stuff that's being published now. I don't read as much of it. You know, the funny thing is now that I've been kind of doing this channel, I'm going back to a lot of my older comic books and rereading or reading for the first time them as well too. Like I've said this in another one of my videos. I'm kind of embarrassed about this. I still have a lot of comic books in my collection that I just haven't read, that I should read, that I should give a try. So I hope that answers those two questions. Thanks for watching. You can check out one of my other videos about horror comic books over here. And until next time, enjoy and read your comic books.